Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. Now, my original plan this weekend was to be doing a front and rear differential oil change on the Cayenne, my 2006 Porsche Cayenne Turbo S. However, I managed to get an absolutely epic cold, was laid up both days, and wasn't really capable of doing anything. It did give me some time to sit in bed and look at a lot of cars on Auto Trader. Why am I considering selling the Cayenne in the first place? That is a great question. After all, I've spent a ton of money on it and it's driving the best it ever has in my ownership, and probably for quite a time before that as well. You know, the car is pulling incredibly strong, it shifts well, it's quiet, it's comfortable, it's phenomenally powerful. It's honestly one of the best cars I've ever had, if we exclude the maintenance costs. But one of the reasons I did spend all of that money was to get back into a position where I actually had a sellable car. After all, it's the difference of being able to sell the car for £1,000 maybe, to being able to maybe get 8 or 9 grand for it. You know, that's a big difference. And whilst I'm never going to recoup the loss that I've made on this car, you know, I'd rather lose less money than more money. Trying to find the silver lining of being so epically ill this weekend, looking at Auto Trader, looking at what I can get, setting a reasonable budget, because I think, you know, with the Cayenne, I did go too cheap and that really did cost me. So looking at, you know, cars that aren't the cheapest possible one is probably a really good idea. I should probably learn from experience. And so that's what we're going to look at today, is a bunch of cars in sort of the max price of £25,000 that I think are interesting, that could be exciting and could be good, you know, potential long-term vehicles for me and the channel. So these are sorted in price, not preference. Now, one of the first cars I've been looking at is the Maserati GrandTourismo. It's very similar to the Quattroporte. It's built on the same platform, but it looks a lot better. It probably doesn't drive as well as the Sport GTS I did a video on a little way back, but I think it looks beautiful. And more importantly, it's actually got 4 usable seats thanks to that Quattroporte platform. And it's actually 4 usable seats for adults, which is such a USP for cars in this segment. If you look at things like DB9s, in 911s, they may, or even XKs, they may have 4 seats, but realistically, you know, you can't actually get any human in there. You might be able to get luggage, but you know, humans have legs. And realistically, finding a car that's actually comfortable and can do a long distance cruise that actually has 4 usable seats is so incredibly rare. And that's why the GrandTourismo is really, you know, up there, and I think in usability is also cheaper than a Sport GTS, just because it's probably not quite as good to drive. The downside is it still has those, you know, Maserati service costs, much the same with the Sport GTS. But you know, I think if you buy well, you get it inspected, you know, you can get a reasonably nice one starting from sort of 17, 18, 19,000. And if you spend something in the region of 25, 27, you can have a really, really good one. You'll still need to get inspected. You still need to make sure that the rust has all been sorted, or at least if it's not been sorted, definitely get some rust protection and get the subframes looked at, because they are increasingly rare these days. But other than that, you have an absolutely phenomenal looking car. You know, really good performance, 4.7 litre V8, the ZF 6-speed gearbox, exactly the same as the Quattroporte. Sounds amazing, looks amazing, 4 usable seats, great combo, as long as you don't encounter massive servicing bills. So that's definitely one of the cars I'm looking at, because that is just epic on all sides. It's a phenomenal looking car. It is a really big car as well, thanks to that Quattroporte background. There's not an ugly angle on it. And whilst I love the Quattroporte and I think it's a great car, you know, it's not necessarily a elegant looking car. Some people love it, some people hate it. But I think if you show anyone a GrandTourismo, they're instantly going to understand why you bought it. It is just such a pretty looking car. But is it really a sensible purchase after a Porsche that has not necessarily financially ruined me, but really cost a lot of money? So this is definitely on the list, but it's probably one of the riskiest cars on the list as well, just because the potential for really big bills is still high. It's not as high as, say, the pre-facelift with the 4.2 and the Duo Select gearbox, or the MZ Shift, you know, whatever they're called in the GrandTourismo. It's not as a high risk as that one, but fundamentally, you know, it's an expensive car to run. Parts are challenging to get, and when you do get them, they are very expensive. So this is probably the most dangerous one on the list, but also I think it's the prettiest. Now, with all the hassles I've had with the Cayenne, with high maintenance costs, etc., etc., perhaps it's time to be sensible and get myself a Lexus. Now, this is an IS-F. It has a 5-litre V8. It pushes out in the region of sort of 416 brake horsepower. It's connected to a quick shifting 8-speed gearbox. It's really kind of like an M3 C63 competitor, and it's probably not better than those, but I think with the reliability and that beautiful sounding sort of V8, I think it's a really compelling package. This one is only £17,000, which is still a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but I think the running costs on this are going to be so incredibly low. Servicing is easy to do. You can just rock up still to your kind of Lexus dealer. Parts availability is great. It seems like it's a really sensible car to get if you wanted, a very fast V8 powered 4-door saloon. I think it looks fabulous. I love the blue of this one that I found on Auto Trader. It's got the 5-litre V8, beautiful soundtrack, JDM reliability. It's pretty rare. Not many content creators have one, so there's also, with that hat on, it could be a really good idea to get. I love the V8 in my LC500. I can't really afford to drop sort of 50k on a 2-door coupe right now. It doesn't make sense with the young family. So it's got 4-door, 4 seats. It's comfortable. It's fast. It's pretty special, and it's going to be reliable. This is really at the top of my list of cars to get. Now, speaking of Mercedes-Benz, this is a Mercedes C63. It's got a 6.3 litre V8. It is brutish, it is fast, estate, so it is practical. I've never actually owned an estate car before, so even just having that would be kind of fun, and it would be a nice, I think, segue from the SUV that everyone kind of hates to the estate car and a fast estate car, which everyone loves. The only downside is that it's kind of boring looking. I know the engine probably does all the talking, but you're going to be sitting in the interior for all of the time you're using the car, and I don't know, it doesn't really necessarily feel special enough. The reliability of the 6.3 litre V8 isn't great. It can have head gasket issues, so you need to make sure that you do check this one out. But for £17,000, it's a lot of motor for the money, and it's an estate, so it's practical. I don't know, what do you think? Is this a good idea? Should I get this one? Let me know. Now, this is probably going to surprise you because this is an electric car, and not something I've really featured on the channel before, but this is a Jaguar I-Pace. It's the HSE, so it's fully loaded, has air suspension, the sort of 12 or 14-way seats. I think it's, at this price point, which is £20,000, these cars have depreciated so much that I think they're really kind of becoming a compelling buy. One note of caution is that, you have that JLR reliability and the dealer network, which isn't, let's face it, the greatest. And so with the I-Pace, reliability hasn't been great. You've got battery issues, you've had recalls for batteries, you've got cells being replaced, you've got the general not quite built particularly well feel of it. But if you get a good one, they're really good cars. I think I've driven one before, and I've test driven one, which was a weird experience. So I test drove at the local JLR dealer before I got my Model 3 Performance, and that test drive was strange. The car was fantastic. The experience was terrible because clearly it was someone else's car who worked at the dealership. There were some golf clubs in the boot and also a pair of socks in the center armrest, which is not really the experience you want when you're coming to a dealer and going, hey, I want to spend lots of money with you. Give me your best car. And there's a pair of socks in the armrest. It's not quite what I was looking for, and kind of soured me a bit on the whole experience of potentially getting an I-Pace. So that's why eventually I went with the Model 3 Performance, but that's a story for another time. The I-Pace itself is a comfortable SUV. It's got a good amount of space. It can feel a little bit dark and enclosed, but if you've got the panoramic roof, which this one does, then that just lets in all of the light that you need and really just kind of opens up the cabin. And you know how much I like a sunroof. So I think, as long as you can get a good warranty with this one, and you can always go to a Jaguar dealer, get it inspected, and then get a aftermarket warranty that is supplied by JLR, that's probably worth its weight in gold. So if you do look at a second-hand I-Pace, definitely get that checked out and get a warranty. But if you do, you're probably going to be fine. But speaking of dangerous, how about a Bentley? This is a Continental GTC. Spring is coming, and so convertibles are always on my mind. And, looking at this, a 6-litre W12 in a drop top, that sounds like a really fun combo. Now, reliability is meh. It's quite expensive to work on, and so the The main issue isn't necessarily that the engine is unreliable, it's just really expensive to work on, because to do anything, you kind of need to drop the engine, and dropping a 6-litre W12 is just a big job. So trying to do things like coolant sensors or O2 sensors generally requires dropping the engine. Yes, there are specialists that can kind of finagle and get things out of position or just partially drop the engine. But, you know, when you're partially dropping a W12, that's going to be an expensive bill. So I think go in with your eyes open on this one. But assuming it's all fine, what a fantastic way to get around. No Cayenne replacement could be complete without talking about that Quattroporte GTS. The one I drove is up for sale for £23,000. It is a really fabulous car. I absolutely loved driving it. I think the combination of the usable space, so 5 adults can comfortably be moved around. It sounds amazing. It drives incredibly well. I think it's a really fantastic car. And again, for the price, I don't think you're going to get a more special and more unique car. That said, the same problems that I have mentioned with the GrandTourismo are still really applicable with the Quattroporte, in that you need to make sure it's been inspected and lots of things have been taken care of and it's been well serviced and well looked after. Parts availability is so-so, and so you need to make sure that you're going in with your eyes open if you do get a Quattroporte, or realistically any Maserati, is that because particularly these generation cars are, they're, from the era when Maserati was working closely with a Ferrari, you're going to be looking at very similar, if not sometimes more, running costs than a similar era Ferrari, which kind of blows my mind a bit. And so, I really love the Quattroporte, and I think if money was no object and I wasn't really concerned about, resale and things like that, then this would be a no-brainer to buy. But it's kind of giving me just a little bit of pause thinking about, okay, well, if I have this car, how long am I realistically going to run it for? Will I be able to sell it for anything close to what I've paid for it when it comes to sale? And that I don't know. Looking at how long a lot of cars tend to stay on the market at this echelon, I think it may be a bit of a risk, which is really sad because I absolutely love this car to bits. If you've never watched my review of this car, I'll link that into the description below, because it was an absolutely phenomenal car to drive. And if I had this as a third car or something like that, if I was that rich to be able to run multiple high-end V8s, then it would be a no-brainer. But I think realistically, it's just a bit of a risk. And one that I'm just probably not really in a position to, considering I think I've used up all of my risk tokens for the year on the Cayenne. So I'm still in two minds about this. I absolutely loved this car to bits. It was phenomenally comfortable to drive. It was amazing performance. It sounded incredible. I think it's had all sort of the major issues taken care of. I think it's been well looked after. But there is that question mark in my mind of, is this just too much of a risk at this stage of both the channel, but also just my available cash? So not sure if that's going to be the judgment call for me. We'll have to see where we end up. But I think fundamentally, the reasons why I love that car are so compelling that if I got the Quattroporte, I would totally understand that decision. It would, it's a car that almost justifies itself. It's a car that you have to drive to really understand why it is so well loved within both the motoring press and I think on YouTube as well, because there's few cars in that segment that drive as well and sound as good as a Quattroporte. And, I think with all of that joy, and you've just got to kind of understand that you're going to have to, if you buy a Quattroporte, you're buying into the whole experience, both good and bad. And hopefully it's all going to be all good and you don't have any major reliability issues. But you need to be aware that there could be, a multiple thousand bill waiting for you for, not terribly trivial stuff. And so whilst I'm balking that I've spent quite a lot of money on the Cayenne, a £5,000 bill for a Maserati isn't unusual. And that's a lot of money. So maybe it's just not the right time for me, which is kind of sad because I did love driving it, but maybe in the future. Now, my second EV on this list, and one that's probably going to surprise you, because I've had a Tesla Model 3 Performance, this exact model, a 2020 year, so I had the heat pump and all that sort of stuff. I had that new. It was my first ever new car, and I was quite disappointed by the ownership experience. Let me tell you why. So I bought the car, it came broken, the cameras didn't work, loads of panels were misaligned, the interior needed some work, all that sort of stuff. And I kid you not that when I picked up the car, I literally went round with a checklist showing all the things that were broken or needed to be adjusted, and then having to register on the Tesla app for all of these things to be done. And I know before the Tesla crew come and get into the comments, first of all, welcome, but they will say, oh, well, that's just the way a Tesla is. And I get it. They don't want to do PDI, so pre-delivery inspections, which is what every other manufacturer does. They just want to get the cars to their customers and fix it afterwards. Fine, that's their prerogative, that's their right, but it does lead to a really crappy customer experience. And it really kind of damaged my viewpoint of the brand, because at that point, I was kind of all in on EVs. We'd had a bunch before, and I was really excited to get a performance EV because it seemed like the ultimate combination of, I like sports cars, this is a really fast car, it looks cool, it's got all the tech, all the gizmos. But literally that day one buying experience, after spending a lot of money, was just kind of a bit disappointing. And so that sort of experience kind of sat in my back of my head as I was using the car. The suspension wasn't particularly good. There was continual issues of things not working, the heat pump needing to be sorted, all this sort of stuff. It just really kind of soured me on the brand, and particularly when you're spending that much money. It was like, what am I doing here? Because fundamentally, I wasn't enjoying the car because I just couldn't really trust it all that much. It was a really good EV in that, it was very efficient. I could go a long distance, but the road noise was terrible. The suspension felt like it was essentially non-existent. And it's just generally a very tiring car to drive long distance. And so ultimately, I just thought, well, this has been a bit of a mistake. Luckily, I managed to sell it before the prices crashed. So this is a 2020 model, as I said, 46,000 miles, so reasonable usage, maybe a touch high for a 4-year-old car, and it's £25,000. Looking at the price I paid, I paid something in the region of sort of 50 something ish pounds for my car when it was brand new. That's a big loss over a few years. And that's again one of the problems with EVs, is that they're constantly changing, and Tesla's constantly altering the pricing to try and get people to buy the cars, all that sort of stuff. And so had I kept the Model 3, I'd be kind of annoyed that essentially it's worth a huge amount less than what I paid for it. But I think, honestly, all of that goes out the window at this price point. So, at £25,000, and you can get the previous version of the Model 3 Performance with the different wheels and that sort of stuff without the heat pump for £19,000. At that price point, honestly, I think it's a great offering, because honestly, where are you going to find anything close to the performance at £25,000? Model 3 Performance, 3.1 seconds to 60. And yes, I totally appreciate that it is potentially one note. And then once you get used to it, it is just a one-trick pony. Yep, but I think it handles pretty well. It hides the weight reasonably well, thanks to the way the dampers are set up. And where are you going to get Lambo beating performance for 25 grand? There is nothing that gets close to it. And it's an EV. And you may be fans of EV for the environmental reasons, or you might not be. I think EVs are great, and honestly, for majority of use cases, they are really, really good. I don't want to get into a debate on whether EVs are bad and we should have V8s forever, whatever. But I think the performance per pound, this is great, and it's still got at least 4 years worth of battery and drivetrain warranty. So you've got that covered. So if anything happens, the battery will be replaced or repaired. 25 grand. It's a good combination, I think. And one of the differences is between when I got my Model 3 and now is you can get a lot of aftermarket modifications, particularly things like coilovers. So the way that the Model 3 Performance is set up from stock is incredibly stiff, and the reason they do that is to kind of hide the car's weight through the corners. Now, you can't escape physics, but if you set up your car to be very hard, it's not going to move as much, and so the passengers aren't going to feel the weight as much, etc, etc, etc. It does lead to a very bone-jarring ride, because when you combine the suspension with the low-profile 20-inch wheels, it's very, very jiggly. And that's one of the main reasons why I got rid of mine. But now you can get a set of aftermarket coilovers for like a grand, £2 grand, and you can really kind of dial it in and just get a little bit more softness into the ride. And so I think at 25 grand, this makes complete sense to me, and I think is a really, really good car to buy. So you may disagree with me, you may think that Teslas suck, or you may think that Teslas are amazing. Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Now, spoiler alert, in an upcoming video, I drive a V12 powered car, and oh my god, is it amazing. That car is slightly terrifying at the same time, but the engine, oh my days. And so it's kind of got me looking at, well, what V12s can I afford? And I've been looking at the Aston Martin Rapide, which is essentially a kind of a stretched DB9. It's got 4 doors, 4 seats. I struggle to call it like a 4-door saloon, because realistically, it's a 2+2 with 4 doors, because the seats in the rear are better than a DB9, but they're still not massive, and the legroom isn't big. It's also quite sort of enclosed, but it's a fabulous looking thing. You've got a 6-litre V12. It has such presence. This one I think has the oxblood interior, which is I think I love it. I think other people might not. It's quite dramatic, I guess. You're going to step in and feel that you are in a car that was worth at least £160,000 when brand new. I think it looks spectacular. I think the Rapide isn't as good to drive as, say, the Quattroporte. I think it's a different segment of car, in all honesty, although they always get compared because they are kind of super saloon executive transports. I think this is more of a cruiser than a car that you take on a B road, but I still think it's a really cool car, in all honesty. I think it's massive. It's got that 6-litre V12. I think it sounds amazing. I'd love to get a DB9, but it just doesn't have the rear seats. And so it's the same problem I'd face if I got, like, say, an LC500, in all honesty. And it's amazing and I love it, but with no usable rear seats, it means that car isn't going to get used much, because I always need to kind of cart the family around. So a Rapide, well, that kind of fixes that problem, in that it still kind of looks like a coupe, and the seats are kind of compromised like a coupe, but they are usable, you know. And I think, oh, what a beautiful way just to get around. And you could totally see getting onto the Eurotunnel and just going all across Europe, you know, just driving long distance and just enjoying it. And it just seems such a special place to be. And also, it's a cheaper way into essentially a DB9, because this was launched from 2010 when they did a bunch of upgrades and improvements on the DB9. And if you compare the price of a Rapide versus a DB9 of the same year, the Rapide is cheaper, even though it was more expensive at launch. Because I think people, when they think Aston Martin, they don't think 4-door saloons. And I think that they're missing a trick, because, you know, the Rapide is, well, it's more practical. I don't know, it's really a practical car, but obviously it's a hatchback, and it's got like kind of a twin sort of like sunken partial shelf thing, all that sort of stuff. And so I think you could, you know, happily get a bunch of soft bags for a long distance trip. But people don't necessarily want that out of Aston Martin. They want their coupes, their 007 vehicles, which the Rapide is never going to be. But I just think it's a really interesting car, and I think it has all the toys and the luxury and a glorious sounding V12. And I don't think it's as bad in the twisties as people say. I really like it. I think it's really cool. And also, it's special. Few people have a Rapide, and it's special, it's dumb, it's practical but not. It's just got so many different sort of characterful features about it that I think it's really, really cool. So last up on this list, the Jaguar XJR. So the X351, the last XJ to be made by Jaguar. Whoa, what a car. You know, 5-litre supercharged V8, pushing out 550 brake horsepower, just British beef personified. What a car. And it's quite rare to get an X351 at this price bracket. So much so that I actually gave the seller a message to see, you know, is this a write-off or something? What essentially is the story behind this one? Because normally they're sort of, you know, 28, 29, 30s really for an X351 XJR. And it looks to be that this seller has an opportunity to buy a dream car. And so they hadn't planned to be selling this car, but they essentially want to get into this, this dream car, which I think is an Aston Martin by the sounds of it. And so they're looking to sell this car, and that's why it's kind of priced to move. But what a combination! 4 seats, good boot space, beautiful sounding V8, really well handling. I think the only question marks I have in my mind is what's the ride quality like, because the XJR, when it was first released in 2013, I think it was set up a little bit stiff, and I think the ride isn't quite, magic carpet like Jaguar standard ride. I think it's a little bit stiffer, and so I think that's the only question mark I have here, because I think ride quality is really important to me. If it's jiggling or jarring, it's just going to get on my nerves and kind of make me want to move the car on. And I think the next car I want to have for at least 6 to sort of 8 months, because I've got to stop flipping cars so much because it's costing me a lot of money. And so I want a car that's interesting, that's fun, that I can take to Scotland or go to Europe and just really, really have a lot of fun. And I think an XJR is just, it's a really compelling one. And just trying to find one for this amount of money is just really rare. Most of the time it's the X350s, which is essentially the classic Jag look and the old man look. And I'm just sort of kind of done with that. I probably would have got an XJR X351 sort of a couple of years ago, but I just think they look a bit twee now, and they're just getting old on a bit, and so like rust is an issue and all that sort of stuff that I'm just not interested in. Whereas this, it's the old modern Jag, if that makes sense. Huge amount of space, beautiful, I think a really nice looking car. And the classic Jag fans will definitely always hate this car because it doesn't look like an XJ. And I think it's very color sensitive. I think in black it looks great because it kind of hides the just the size of the vehicle a little bit better. Black is always a very slimming color. And I just think, what a combination. British beef, supercharged, Jag. What's cooler than that? So what do you think I should get? Which car would you pick? And why? Let me know in the comments. Which one do you think I should get out of any cars in this list? Or is there a car that I've not considered? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Or do you think I should just keep the Cayenne? Let me know. All things are possible on God's green earth. Let me know. If you watched this far, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you consider liking and subscribing. And with that, I'll catch you down the road.